Hi, everyone. With me is Jan Croon, the author of The War Outside My Window. Thank you for joining me, Jan.
Oh, you're
Uh,
welcome.
our first question is, how did you become involved with The War Outside My Window?
I saw a Facebook feed, an article that was from the Washington Post, and it described these set of seven journals written by this kid during the Civil War, and it was really intriguing. So I sent it to a publishing friend of mine, Ted Savis, and he became just as intrigued and asked me to be the editor.
So, introduce us to the writer of the diary.
Okay. Leroy Riley Gresham was born in 1847. He was the son of a wealthy, influential man in Macon, Georgia. And when he was 8 years old, he was crippled by a fall. Bricks fell on his leg and crushed it. And as they were going to a doctor, and his mother gave him a little journal to write in when he was 12 in 1860. And he started the journal and kept writing until just before his death in 1865. It's a fascinating journal.
So, how did you go about editing this?
The editing process was really rather interesting. I transcribed it. The journals are online, digitized at the Library of Congress. And I transcribed them. And as I was working on them, I had to find out which people were who, because of course Leroy knew who he was talking about. I ended up opening up an Ancestry.com tree for the family, which has 1,700 individuals on it now. I still haven't found about 3 or 4 people, but started finding out who was related to who and how they were related to him. Also following the war and the battles as they were through the media of the time, which was an interesting way of looking at the war. You see what they found out, which oftentimes was not correct. And then they'd have to go back and revise what they knew, and just found out about life in general in the South during the war through the eyes of somebody who was a teenager, just a typical teenager.
This project had several interesting twists and turns. Tell us something that was a bit of a surprise for you.
One of the surprises I had was how absolutely brilliant this young man was. He was not in school. He was mostly home taught because of his illness. But he's, as I said, a teenager just like any other teenager. He's got little scribbles in um, his diaries. He writes like a teenager at times, but he's also incredibly in tune to what's happening around him. Um, he has opinions. He, as he gets older, his writing becomes much more adult-like, so you get to see him grow as a writer. Um, and it just the fact that I could relate to him as a teenager just like I could one of my classroom's kids, I thought was just brilliant. I really like that about working with it.
So, he was describing the death of his society in the Old South and his own over the course of can I rephrase that one? So over the course of years without fully comprehending it, talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, he had an illness. I'm not going to say what it is because that will that's a spoiler. um And actually, the publisher and I didn't realize for ourselves what was happening to him until we got a doctor involved who did some research on what it was that was the true illness. He thought everything went back to that accident when the chimney bricks crushed his leg, and he describes how he's feeling on certain days, some of the procedures they had to go through. It was like a pharmaceutical roulette he was going through, as they're trying to find something that is going to treat his constant pain and the other issues he was having. That was kind of hard to read.
So who would find The War Outside My Window an interesting book?
I think just about anybody would be interested in it. People who are very familiar with the Civil War will get to look at it from a different perspective, that of someone who is getting information on the war through media sources that are not accurate. They get to follow it that way, which is a different way of looking at it. I think teenagers would enjoy it as well, because he's a teen just like they are. He has some of the same concerns that they do, even though it's 150 some years earlier. Um, I think people who are interested in a human interest story would be very interested in this as well, because that's what he's telling. It's his story, and it's just I'm still amazed by the what breadth and the depth of what is in this work.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, Jan. It sounds like a great book, and I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.